To him, it was this place where he was going to do an experiment. He was going to get people together.
The morning at the Kilcher Homestead began like many other mornings in the quiet wilderness of Alaska. The sky was pale and cold, and the mountains in the distance were covered with fresh snow that reflected the early light of the winter sun. The air carried that sharp chill that only people who live in Alaska truly understand. It was the kind of cold that made every breath visible and turned the ground hard like stone. For the Kilcher family, mornings like this were part of everyday life. The homestead had always been a place where work started early, and every day brought new tasks that needed attention. Fences needed repair, animals needed food, tools needed fixing, and sometimes the land itself needed to be cleared or reshaped. On this particular day, Atsley had planned to work on a small section of ground near one of the older parts of the property. Over the years, the soil there had become uneven, and he wanted to smooth it out before spring arrived. It was not an exciting job. In fact, it was the kind of simple task that happened often on a homestead where the land was always changing with the seasons. Jane had come outside with him that morning to help. She stood nearby while brushing snow away from the surface so that Atsley could dig more easily. Around them the wilderness was quiet. Only the sound of the shovel breaking through the frozen soil and the distant cry of a raven flying overhead disturbed the silence. The land around the homestead stretched far in every direction, a wide open space of trees, hills, and snow that had existed long before any homes or roads appeared there. For generations, the Kilcher family had lived on this land and believed they knew every part of it. They had walked the trails, built cabins, planted gardens, and raised animals across the property. Over the years, they had also found many small things buried in the soil. Sometimes it was an old rusted tool left behind by earlier settlers. Sometimes it was broken farm equipment that had been forgotten long ago. Discoveries like that were common when working on land that had been used for decades. That morning, Atsley expected nothing more than another routine day of work. He pushed the shovel into the hard ground again and again, slowly breaking through the frozen surface. The soil was packed tight from months of winter weather. But he had dealt with worse conditions before. Each movement was steady and patient, the kind of rhythm that comes naturally to someone who spends most of their life working outdoors. Jane continued clearing snow nearby, occasionally glancing over to check his progress. For a long time, everything felt completely normal. The quiet of the wilderness remained unchanged, and nothing about the work suggested that anything unusual was about to happen. But then suddenly the calm rhythm of the morning was broken by a sharp sound that echoed through the cold air. Atsley's shovel struck something solid beneath the ground. The noise was different from the dull thud of hitting a rock. It was sharper and metallic, a sound that clearly did not belong in the natural soil of the homestead. Atsley froze for a moment, gripping the shovel handle while looking down at the spot where the blade had hit. Jane noticed his reaction immediately and stepped closer. She had heard the sound too, and it was strange enough to make her curious. She asked him what he had hit, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched down and began brushing loose dirt away with his gloved hands. At first, he could only see a small dark edge beneath the soil. It was smooth and flat, unlike any rock he had seen in the area. Jane leaned closer, studying the surface carefully. The shape and color made it clear that this was not a natural part of the ground. It looked like metal. Atsley continued clearing the dirt slowly, revealing more of the object little by little. The metal surface appeared surprisingly clean, despite being buried under frozen soil. It did not look like old rusted scrap or broken machinery. In fact, it looked almost preserved, as if time had not affected it very much at all. The discovery created an uneasy feeling between them. Something about the situation felt strange. Objects could end up buried in the ground for many reasons, but this one did not look like something that had simply been thrown away. The more dirt they removed, the clearer it became that the metal had been placed there intentionally. Jane asked how long he thought it had been buried. Atsley looked at the exposed edge and thought about the history of the land. The homestead had been in the family for many years, and he could not remember anyone ever mentioning something like this being buried there. That meant it might have been hidden long before the current generation had arrived. The idea made the moment feel heavier. Discoveries like this always came with questions. Who had buried it? Why was it hidden there? And how long had it remained beneath the ground without anyone noticing? The wind moved gently across the field, rustling the branches of nearby trees, as if the land itself was quietly watching what they were doing. For the first time that morning, the work no longer felt like an ordinary task. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a mystery that had been hidden beneath the homestead for years. Atsley and Jane eventually stopped digging and decided it would be better to call the rest of the family before uncovering anything further. On a place like the Kilcher Homestead, important discoveries were never handled alone. Everyone had a voice, and everyone's opinion mattered when something unusual appeared on the land. By the afternoon, several members of the family had gathered near the spot where the metal object remained partially buried. Otto arrived with the slow, steady walk of someone who had spent a lifetime working on that same ground. He studied the exposed metal carefully, running his gloved hand across its surface while thinking quietly. Otto had seen many things uncovered from the soil over the years, but this discovery felt different from the usual rusted tools or broken parts they sometimes found. The shape and condition of the metal suggested that it had been placed there deliberately, rather than forgotten or discarded. Ivan joined him and began brushing away more dirt to see how large the object might be. As they worked, the group slowly realized that the metal extended deeper into the earth than anyone had expected. What had first looked like a small piece of buried metal now seemed much larger, possibly part of something hidden completely beneath the ground. The realization changed the mood around the group. What had started as a simple chore had now become a mystery that no one fully understood yet. The land beneath the Kilcher homestead had suddenly revealed a secret, and the family was only beginning to see the first piece of it. The discovery beneath the frozen soil changed the mood around the Kilcher homestead in a way that no one had expected. What had started as a simple morning chore had quickly turned into something much more serious. The small piece of metal that Atsley had uncovered was clearly not just a random object buried in the ground. The more the family looked at it, the more they realized that it might be part of something larger, hidden beneath the earth. As the afternoon slowly passed, everyone gathered around the dig site continued studying the exposed edge. Otto remained quiet for a long time, thinking carefully about what he was seeing. He had spent most of his life on that land, and he understood better than anyone that Alaska often held secrets below the surface. The land had been crossed by many different people over the years. Long before the Kilcher family arrived, hunters, explorers, miners, and travelers had moved through the region searching for opportunity. Some stayed for a short time, while others left quickly when conditions became too difficult. Many of those early visitors left behind tools, equipment, or supplies that later became buried under snow, dirt, and vegetation. Because of that history, it was never completely surprising to find old objects beneath the soil. But this discovery still felt unusual. The metal surface looked too well preserved, and the shape did not match anything the family recognized. After discussing the situation for a while, the group decided it would be best to stop digging until the next day. The ground was too frozen to continue safely without better tools, and no one wanted to damage whatever might be hidden there. That evening, the family returned to the main cabin, where the warmth of the wood stove offered relief from the cold air outside. Normally, evenings at the homestead were peaceful. The family would talk about the day's work, share stories, and make plans for the next morning. But on this night, the conversation kept returning to the same topic: the strange metal object buried in the ground. Ivan even drew a rough sketch on a piece of paper showing the curved shape they had uncovered. As he studied the drawing, he became more convinced that the object might be part of a larger structure. Jane mentioned that something about the situation made her uncomfortable. She could not explain exactly why, but the idea that someone had buried something large and hidden it carefully beneath the soil did not feel right to her. Charlotte suggested that if the object turned out to be very old, it might even have historical value. Alaska had a long and complicated past filled with stories of explorers, gold miners, and small settlements that appeared and disappeared over time. Otto listened quietly to everyone's thoughts before finally speaking. He reminded them that the land often revealed its secrets slowly, and that patience was important when dealing with discoveries like this. Rushing could lead to mistakes or damage something that might hold historical importance. By the time the conversation ended, the family had agreed on a simple plan. They would return to the dig site the next morning with better tools and carefully continue uncovering the object. Their goal was not to remove it completely, but simply to reveal enough of its shape to understand what they were dealing with. That night the wind moved across the open land around the homestead, while the family slept inside the cabin. Outside, the partially uncovered metal object remained exactly where they had left it, frozen once again into the earth. The following morning arrived colder than the day before. The sky was gray, and a thin layer of frost covered the ground around the homestead. One by one, the members of the family made their way back to the dig site. The scene looked almost unchanged from the afternoon before. The disturbed soil surrounded the exposed piece of metal, and the rest of the object still remained hidden beneath the frozen ground. Lee stepped into the shallow hole first and examined the metal edge carefully before lifting his shovel. This time his movements were slower and more careful than before. Each scoop of dirt was placed gently to the side, while Ivan used his hands to brush away loose soil around the metal surface. Gradually the object began revealing more of its shape. The metal curved downward and extended farther into the ground than they had originally expected. It almost looked like some kind of protective cover placed over something else. As the digging continued, Ivan's shovel suddenly struck something new beneath the soil. The sound was different from the metallic clang they had heard earlier. This time it produced a dull, hollow knock that echoed slightly through the small hole they had created. Everyone immediately stopped moving. Ivan knelt down and carefully cleared the dirt away from the area where his shovel had made contact. Within a few moments, a second material appeared beneath the soil. It was dark brown and rough, completely different from the smooth metal surface above it. Jane leaned forward as the shape became clearer. It was wood. Very old wood. The grain was visible despite years spent underground, and the color suggested that it had aged for a long time. The discovery changed the entire situation. Now it appeared that the metal object had been placed directly on top of something made of wood. The group slowly cleared more soil away from the wooden surface, revealing straight edges and thick boards that formed a rectangular shape. Charlotte studied the structure carefully before speaking. She believed they were looking at some kind of crate or storage box. The more dirt they removed, the clearer the shape became. The wooden boards were strong and reinforced with metal brackets along the corners. Whoever had built it had clearly intended it to last. The realization created a new wave of curiosity and tension among the group. A crate buried beneath the ground could mean many different things. It might contain tools, supplies, or equipment from an earlier time. It might also contain something far more unusual. Jane admitted that the discovery made her nervous. Objects were sometimes buried intentionally when people wanted to hide something or protect it from being found. Otto agreed that the arrangement of the metal cover above the crate suggested that someone had gone through considerable effort to keep the box hidden and protected from the elements. The group continued clearing dirt slowly until the outline of the crate became fully visible. It was larger than any of them had expected, nearly the size of a small trunk used for transporting heavy items. Near one corner, Ivan brushed away another layer of soil and uncovered a metal latch attached to the lid. The crate had been sealed tightly. The sight of the latch caused everyone to pause again. A sealed crate buried deep beneath the ground meant that whatever was inside had been intentionally hidden for a reason. The wind moved quietly across the open field, while the family stood around the discovery, each person thinking about the possibilities. Lee finally crouched beside the crate and rested his hand on the wooden lid. The wood felt solid despite its age, a sign that it had been protected well by the metal cover above it. He looked up at the others and asked the question that everyone had been wondering. Were they ready to open it and see what was inside? No one answered immediately. The moment carried a strange mix of excitement and uncertainty. Opening the crate might reveal something ordinary, like old tools or supplies, but it could also reveal something far more surprising. Otto eventually spoke and reminded everyone to move slowly and carefully. Discoveries like this were rare, and whatever lay inside the crate might hold an important piece of history connected to the land itself. The group nodded in agreement, and Lee reached toward the latch. The moment they had all been waiting for was finally about to happen. For several long moments, no one moved. The wind drifted quietly across the open land around the Kilcher homestead, brushing through the dry grass and the branches of nearby trees. The family stood around the shallow pit they had dug, their attention fixed on the large wooden crate that had been buried beneath the frozen ground for who knew how many years. The discovery already felt strange enough, but the presence of the metal cover above it made the situation even more mysterious. Whoever had placed the crate there had clearly taken the time to hide and protect it carefully. The thick wooden boards looked strong, even after spending decades underground, and the metal latch that sealed the lid still appeared solid despite its age. Lee knelt beside the crate, resting one gloved hand gently on the lid, while looking at the others for confirmation. No one spoke right away. The moment carried a quiet tension that seemed to settle over the entire clearing. Jane stood a few steps back, watching closely while holding her arms tight against the cold. She felt both curious and uneasy at the same time. Discoveries buried in the ground sometimes revealed interesting pieces of history, but they could also bring unexpected problems. Ivan finally nodded slowly, signaling that they should continue. Otto remained calm, but his expression showed the seriousness of the moment. He had seen many things uncovered from the soil during his life, but a sealed crate buried so carefully beneath the homestead was not something he had ever expected to encounter. Lee took a slow breath and reached for the metal latch. The hinge resisted at first, stiff from years of being buried beneath dirt and frost. He pulled a little harder, and suddenly the latch shifted with a dull click that echoed quietly across the field. The crate was no longer sealed. For a brief second, everyone seemed to hold their breath. Lee slowly lifted the edge of the lid, just enough to peer inside the crate. The opening revealed only darkness at first, but as his eyes adjusted, he began to see shapes inside. Whatever was stored there had been wrapped in old cloth and stacked carefully. He looked closer, trying to understand what he was seeing. His expression changed immediately. Without saying a word, he lowered the lid again and stood up slowly. Jane noticed the look on his face right away. It was not the expression of someone who had found ordinary tools or supplies. Something about what he had seen had clearly surprised him. She asked quietly what was inside the crate. Lee hesitated for a moment before answering. He glanced toward Otto and Ivan, as if trying to choose his words carefully. Finally he spoke in a calm but serious voice. He explained that the objects inside appeared to be very old, much older than any of them had expected. The statement caused another long silence among the group. Otto stepped forward and crouched beside the crate, opening the lid slightly himself so that he could take a closer look. Inside the box were several items wrapped in layers of cloth and leather that had darkened with age. One of the bundles had partially come loose, revealing the wooden handle of what looked like an antique tool or instrument. Another object appeared to be a small metal container with markings stamped into its surface. The items did not look like ordinary homestead equipment. Instead, they resembled objects that might have belonged to travelers or explorers from a much earlier time. Otto studied the contents carefully before closing the lid again. He stood up slowly, his thoughts clearly focused on the history of the land around them. The Kilcher Homestead had existed for many years, but the region itself had been used by many different people long before modern settlements appeared. Hunters had traveled through the wilderness searching for game. Prospectors had passed through the area during the gold rush years, hoping to find fortune in the mountains. Some had stayed long enough to build temporary camps, while others had moved on quickly when conditions became too harsh. It was possible that the crate had belonged to someone from that earlier time. Perhaps it had been buried intentionally to protect valuable supplies or personal belongings, or perhaps it had been hidden for reasons that were now impossible to know. Charlotte suggested that the objects might even have historical importance if they truly dated back many decades. Items like those could provide valuable information about the people who had lived or traveled through the region before the homestead existed. Jane looked out across the wide stretch of land surrounding them. From a distance, everything appeared exactly the same as it always had. The cabin stood quietly against the backdrop of snow-covered mountains, and the forest remained still under the pale sky. Yet the discovery in the ground had changed the way the place felt. The land now seemed to hold a deeper story that the family had never fully known before. Ivan spoke next, pointing out that the best decision might be to bring in someone with professional knowledge to examine the items properly. If the crate truly contained historical objects, experts could help identify them and determine their age. Otto agreed with that idea. Although the land belonged to the family, the history connected to those objects might belong to a much larger story about the region itself. Atsley looked down at the crate once more, thinking about how close it had come to remaining hidden forever. If his shovel had landed only a few inches away, the metal cover might never have been discovered. The crate could have stayed buried for many more years without anyone knowing it was there. The thought made the moment feel even more remarkable. Sometimes history remained hidden simply because no one happened to dig in the right place. The family eventually stepped away from the pit, leaving the crate resting where they had uncovered it. No one felt comfortable removing the items until they could be examined carefully and documented. As they walked back toward the cabins, the quiet of the homestead slowly returned. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the familiar scent of spruce and cold air. From the outside, the land looked unchanged. But for the Kilcher family, the discovery had created a new awareness of the past that lay beneath their feet. For generations they had worked the land, believing they understood every corner of it. Yet the soil had revealed something important. No matter how long a family lives on a piece of land, the ground beneath it still holds memories of the people who came before. Those memories sometimes remain hidden for decades, waiting silently until someone disturbs the earth in just the right place. The buried crate was more than just an unusual discovery. It was a reminder that history does not always stay in books or museums. Sometimes it remains quietly buried in the wilderness, protected by time and forgotten by everyone. And every once in a while, when the land is disturbed by chance, those forgotten stories rise back to the surface. The Kilcher family knew that the crate they had uncovered might only be the beginning of a larger mystery connected to the past of the region. Whatever the objects inside truly were, they had already changed the way the family looked at their homestead. The land that had provided shelter and livelihood for generations had now revealed a secret that had been waiting patiently beneath the frozen soil. And somewhere within that quiet wilderness, there might still be other hidden pieces of history resting below the surface, waiting for the day when someone would discover them again.